The music was bright, the laughter louder, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with celebration. My engagement party was exactly how I dreamed it, a blur of champagne glasses clinking, family crowding around, and friends pulling me into hugs that smelled like perfume and nostalgia. Everywhere I turned, there were faces smiling back at me, faces that believed in the fairy tale I'd carefully built, and for a while I let myself believe it too. Until the doors opened, he walked in. The crowd didn't notice right away. They kept laughing, clapping, raising toasts. But I did. My heart stuttered, my stomach dropped, and for a split second the whole room tilted sideways. The chandeliers blurred, the music muffled, and all I could see was him. The one person I had prayed would never appear. Our eyes met across the room, and he smiled. Not the warm, polite smile of a guest, but the kind that carried history, secrets, and danger. I froze where I stood, glass trembling in my hand, as if the ground beneath me had given way. No one else knew what that smile meant, but I did. Because years ago, in a moment I'd buried so deep I thought it would never resurface, I made him a promise. A reckless, foolish promise whispered in the dark. I promised I'd give him one night before I married. I never thought he'd show up. To understand how we ended up here, you need to know about Emily. She wasn't just my best friend. She was my other half. From playground scraped knees to late-night study sessions, we'd carried each other through every milestone. If blood made sisters, time and loyalty made us family. And then there was her brother, Daniel. Daniel was 2 years older than us, the kind of boy who seemed larger than life from the very beginning. He was the golden one in their family, tall, confident, reckless in ways that made teachers furious and girls fall hopelessly in love. Where Emily was steady and thoughtful, Daniel was fire, unpredictable, loud, impossible to ignore. Growing up, I mostly saw him in passing. He'd tease me when I came over, snatch snacks off our study table, or ruffle my hair like I was still 10 years old. Sometimes he'd wink at me in that infuriating way that made me roll my eyes, but blush anyway. He wasn't always kind, but he was always there. Protective, too, in his own roundabout way. I remember once a boy in high school made fun of me, and Daniel cornered him in the hallway. The teasing never stopped, but no one dared cross me again. The thing about Daniel was that he was always too much, too charming, too flirtatious, too sure of himself, and yet unforgettable. I told myself I never saw him that way. He was Emily's brother, off limits by default. But even then, part of me knew Daniel had a way of leaving shadows long after he left the room. It happened years later, in college. Emily and I were still inseparable, and by extension, Daniel was never too far from my orbit. He'd grown into himself. Sharper jawline, easier confidence, the kind of man who turned heads without even trying. One night, after a party, I found myself sitting with him on Emily's porch steps. The house was quiet, the world heavy with that thick, late-night silence. We weren't drunk exactly, but we weren't sober either, loose enough to talk about things we'd usually never touch. He asked me about love, about whether I thought I'd marry young, about what kind of man I wanted. I laughed, deflecting, because the idea of confessing anything real to Daniel felt like handing him a weapon. But he didn't look away. His eyes lingered, serious in a way I wasn't used to seeing. And then he said it, half joking, half daring. "Before you marry anyone else, give me one night." The words hung between us, sticky and dangerous. I laughed, too loud, too fast. "Yeah, sure, whatever you say, Daniel." But he didn't laugh. He just smiled, slow and knowing, as if my dismissal was its own kind of promise. And the worst part? I agreed. Not because I meant it, but because I wanted the moment to end. Because saying yes was easier than arguing. After that night, I buried it. Convinced myself it was harmless banter, one of those silly, reckless things people say when the world feels too big and the night too long. But deep down, I remembered. Every time I saw him, the words echoed. Not loud, not constant. Just there. A shadow behind everything else. A promise I thought would never matter. Until it did. By the time I met James, the promise felt like a ghost. Distant, irrelevant, something I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined. James was everything Daniel wasn't. Where Daniel was reckless, James was steady. Where Daniel played games, James made plans. He had a calmness about him, the kind that made me feel like I could finally stop holding my breath. He didn't sweep me off my feet with wild gestures or dangerous charm. Instead, he showed up every day in 100 quiet ways. He listened when I talked about work, remembered how I liked my coffee, picked me up when my car broke down without turning it into a performance. James didn't make me dizzy. He made me safe. When he proposed, it wasn't some over-the-top spectacle, just a quiet dinner, a ring slipped onto my finger, and the words, "Let's build a life together." And for the first time in years, I believed I could. Emily adored him. My parents trusted him. He was, by every measure, the man I should marry. And Daniel, he was gone. Traveling, chasing work opportunities, vanishing into the world the way he always had. Out of sight, out of mind. I told myself the past was closed. That promise would never matter. But ghosts have a way of coming back, and mine was about to walk straight through the door. It was a few weeks before the engagement party when I saw him again. I was walking out of a cafe downtown, arms full of shopping bags and bridal magazines, when that familiar voice cut through the crowd. Well, well, look who's getting married. I froze before I turned. Daniel stood there looking older but sharper, like time had only deepened the edges of his charm. Same confident smirk, same eyes that never seemed to look at you but through you. We hugged, awkward and quick. He asked about Emily, about my parents, about the wedding. On the surface, it was small talk. But underneath, I felt that old charge humming in the silence between his words. And then he leaned in, lowering his voice just enough that only I could hear. "Remember what you promised me?" My heart skipped. I laughed. Too fast, too high-pitched. That? Oh God, Daniel, we were kids. That was a joke. But his smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. "You think I forgot?" The way he said it made my stomach twist. Half teasing, half serious. Exactly like that night years ago. I brushed it off, shifting the conversation, telling myself he was only stirring trouble like always. Still, as I walked away, his words clung to me. "You think I forgot?" For days afterward, I replayed the encounter, convincing myself it meant nothing. Daniel had always thrived on making people uncomfortable. This was just another one of his games. He wouldn't dare. Not now. Not with everything on the line. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, unease had already taken root. The engagement party was already in full swing when Daniel finally arrived. The room seemed to shift the second he stepped through the doors. Late, as always, but dressed like he owned the night. Dark suit, loosened tie, that practiced smolder in his eyes. And though dozens of people turned to greet him, his gaze locked on me. My pulse stuttered. I forced myself to look away, to laugh at something James was saying, but I could feel Daniel's eyes trailing me like a shadow. "Daniel!" Emily squealed, rushing to hug her brother. He kissed her cheek, grinned, and then shook James's hand with all the warmth of a brother-in-law-to-be. To everyone else, he was perfectly polite, perfectly appropriate, the prodigal brother returning to celebrate. When his turn came to greet me, he leaned in close, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "Congratulations," he murmured, then softer still. "Are you ready to keep your promise?" The champagne flute nearly slipped from my hand. My throat went dry, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I forced a smile, laughed nervously, pretending it was just another one of Daniel's teasing jabs. Emily's eyes flicked toward us. She caught the awkward energy but misread it, rolling her eyes. "You two never change," she teased, brushing it off as the same old sibling-style banter she'd grown up with. But I knew better. I could still feel Daniel's words burning in my ear, a reminder of something I'd buried years ago, something that had no place in this glittering room full of family, friends, and a future I was supposed to be celebrating. And the worst part? From the way he looked at me, I knew he wasn't joking. I slipped outside to the balcony, needing a breath of air, needing to shake off the weight of Daniel's whisper. The night was cool, the garden strung with soft lights, the faint hum of music drifting from inside. I thought I'd bought myself a moment of peace, but then the door clicked shut behind me. "Daniel." He leaned against the railing like he'd been waiting for me, that familiar smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You ran off fast," he said. "Nervous?" I crossed my arms, steadying myself. "Cut it out, Daniel. Whatever you think this is, it's not." But he didn't flinch. He took a step closer, his voice low, almost tender. "You made me a promise. Don't pretend you forgot. One night, before you got married. That meant something. My stomach twisted. I was 19. I laughed it off. It was a joke. Funny, he murmured, tilting his head. You don't look like you're laughing. I felt the blood drain from my face. His words weren't playful anymore. They were deliberate, weighted, like a chain tightening around me. He pressed on, eyes locked on mine. If you marry him without keeping your word, you're lying. To him, to me, to yourself, and you know it. The manipulation slid under my skin like poison. I wanted to scream, to shove him away, but fear rooted me in place, because suddenly I realized he wasn't bluffing. If I refused, if I pushed back too hard, Daniel might not just keep the secret, he might expose it. And then everything, my engagement, my friendship with Emily, the life I'd built, could shatter in an instant. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. The secret was already corroding me, and if I let it fester any longer, Daniel would own me. So, I went to Emily. The words felt heavy, like they might crush me as they left my mouth. The promise I'd made years ago, Daniel's whisper at the party, his push on the balcony. I told her everything. Her face went pale, then red, then cold. You promised him that? She stammered, fury and hurt colliding in her voice. I was a teenager, I tried to explain. It meant nothing, but he's using it now. He won't let it go. She didn't answer right away. She stormed through the house straight to Daniel. I followed, shaking. Emily's voice cracked like a whip. Tell me it isn't true. Daniel didn't hesitate. He smirked, leaned back, and said the words that burned me alive. She wanted it too. She agreed. Don't act innocent. Emily gasped as if he'd struck her. And that's when I heard another voice. James. He'd been standing just beyond the doorway, and from his expression, he'd caught enough. His eyes searched mine, filled with a new kind of doubt. For the first time, I felt my future slipping from me, not because of Daniel's charm, but because of my silence. Keeping the secret had almost cost me everything. Later, when the dust settled and the party fractured into whispers, I realized the truth. Sometimes a single careless promise can echo louder than vows. He thought I'd betray my future to honor my past. But I won't. Not now. Not ever. He thought the past gave him power. Instead, it exposed him. I didn't owe him my body. I owed myself the truth.